Future Skills Ireland podcast. I am your host, Shauna Dunlop, the Director of Future Skills Needs and Solace, the Further Education and Training Authority in Ireland. I am delighted and very excited to be bringing this first ever podcast season to Ireland, where we will focus real conversations with people who tell us about their skills journeys over their careers. We'll also talk about the skills and the opportunities, all the research and challenges that we have in terms of skills in Ireland, all with the singular purpose of starting a new national conversation on skills in Ireland. I'm really delighted today to be welcoming my guest, Dr. Kevin Marshall. Kevin is the head of future skilling in Microsoft. Obviously, everyone would be very interested in that part of his role. He is also the chairman of the National Skills Council, and he has a very important role to play in terms of Ireland's skills in that capacity. And I'm also, I have to acknowledge as well, that Kevin is also a board member of Solace, the organisation that I represent. You're very, very welcome, Kevin.
Delighted to be here.
So you have a busy day, probably from day to day, would you?
It can be very busy, yeah. But it's all integrated, and
Yes.
it's all about thinking about skills and the future skills and the current skills and how we think about anticipating what's coming at us in the current world,
Yes.
particularly around the AI
Yes.
adoption, revolution, whatever term you care to use. But it's clear that how we work, how we play, how we think is changing.
Yes.
So how do we adapt as a society to meet those needs, and both at a company level, but also at a country level?
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
the business model is changing. It's all laid out in Draghi.
Mm-hmm.
Skills are core to this.
Mm-hmm.
How do we think about it?
Yeah.
So I'm in that conversation among a number of different organizations, which is a great privilege.
Yes.
And each organization and each entity has a different way of coming at it.
Yes.
And that's fine, but it's trying to put a bit of structure and trying to place the right bet that allows you to build a framework to be responsive.
Yes.
And I think that is the opportunity, but that is also the greatest challenge.
Oh.
And you would know that working in an organization which sits in the middle of that,
Yes.
you know, how do we think about that? And how do, I guess, from my perspective over like the Skills Council chairing that, I think it was September we started.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
To me, it's about urgency.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know,
Skills
and creating
over now. Mm-hmm.
you know, national conversation. But there's an urgency about this,
Yes.
right? Because it takes time
Yes.
to learn skills, to embed skills. It takes time for organizations to change.
Yes.
And I would say that about my own organization as well.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mhm.
you just don't switch on the switch like that.
Yeah.
So it's to think about that and to constantly have the conversation with people about, I think we need to do this, you know,
Yeah.
and then you've got to manage all within a world that's changing at a macro level
Yes.
that we've never seen that before either. So it's difficult.
It is
It's-
difficult. And I think certainly like our conversation, it almost really has to kind of just focus on future skills in that context, because as you say, we are in a very changing dynamic space. You mentioned the Draghi report. So that Draghi report, maybe just put that in context. This is really about the competitiveness in terms of, you know, what Europe set out for the world. And even though it's relatively recent, it was really only October, November time last year that, you know, we seen this kind of report coming in to tell us about thinking about how does Europe prepare for a more competitive space. And in the few months that we've had since October, November, well, I mean, they've been chaotic months in many ways, but tumultuous as well. But I do think future skills, I suppose we do have an opportunity to focus in on certain different areas, I think, and that is part of our national conversation. So I'll maybe just give you a chance to talk about Microsoft first of all, Kevin, maybe, because I mean this role that you have, you know, future skilling for Microsoft, the head of future skilling for Microsoft. I mean, if you just take a moment to reflect on that, what does that mean even, in terms of, the role that you have and what it might mean for the future skills of such a big, massive global organization?
It's quite, when you put it like that, it's actually quite daunting. And go, actually, what am I supposed to do? I think, I suppose internally in Microsoft, the conversation is all around AI and that emerging technology, the stuff that's here and the stuff that's coming. And even if you look right now, this week, our Microsoft Build conference is on in Seattle, which is all for developers about the future tech, right? And if you look at some of that stuff that's all online, the next set of AI technologies is all around agentic AI and how we're going to develop and use agents to enhance productivity, to increase our efficiencies, and to reframe how we work, right? So that's coming at pace, and that's coming at pace across the whole technology industry. When I look at what I try and think about in Microsoft is there are kind of three pillars to that. And it's both an internal focus in terms of how we skill people up, both in that technology, but also then how we work with other units within Microsoft on the leadership, the communication, and all those skills are as equally important as the technology, because there's loads of engineers, data scientists, computer science in Microsoft, but they're finance people, they're sales people, they're marketing people. It's a whole range of different skills that people need at different times. And then there's our responsibility to society, which is, over the last year has probably been the focus that I have paid attention to the most. And that kind of comes in three layers. So you have the education piece. So, and we have DreamSpace. DreamSpace has been up and running since 2018. To date, about 350,000 students have either come into DreamSpace or come in virtually over the last 6 years. And we have 15 different programs, and we do podcasts, we do live streams, and 2 schools a day. And so that's a model that is working, and we're building on that. Actually, one of the most interesting events we had recently was we had Adam Harris from As I Am in, and he did a live stream for 350 schools with about 10,000 learners on at the best event we've ever done in terms of numbers, and it was just talking about coding, right? Which is interesting in the context of the acceleration in AI,
the reach of that, the impact of that,
the impact, and he's such an amazing guy in what he does. So like you get to do that's really impactful. The other areas where I think we focused on this year is really trying to think about workforce development. I mean, I do think that's the biggest challenge the country faces right now, is the streamlining of our offerings to the market as a country, particularly the SME space, right? So if you look at, you have Digital Skill Net, you have Solus, you have all the companies have various different numbers, a lot of different stuff, right? How do we think about putting that together? And actually that leads. So let me finish that point. So that's an area we've worked on. We worked on with those organizations over the last year in partnership to try and look at that. And the area that we're sort of other impact is kind of the likes of working with the IDA. Thinking about the skill needs at that enterprise level. So there's there's kind of categories of buckets you think about, because you can't do it all. And what I found the challenge is, and it goes back to the National Skills Council work, is the need for the observatory, the skills observatory, right? Because the first thing is the need for the skills mapping exercise. So we had kind of 3 big things we did in the Skills Council or working on. One is the National Skills Observatory. The 2 is mapping the skills landscape of the country. And the 3rd is we had some conversations around the National Training Fund. The first 2 are particularly important, and they're interlinked. And the idea is that we have a map of actually any particular region of where the skills are, what's the provision?
Yes.
And then that will allow us to think about what the future could be.
Yes.
What are the needs?
Yes.
Then the observatory comes in and it has all the data that your organization has collected over the years.
Yes.
You link that in with what the HEA is thinking about, and you've other organizations, and you just build this rich data set so you can have a more poignant and pointed conversation about, well, actually, do we need to place money here?
Yes.
Do we need to do that?
Yes.
What about that here?
Yes.
What are the skills corridors?
Yes.
You know, and that you change the conversation about just handing out money in the way that we've always done it before.
Yes.
And go, actually, no. The data's telling us this. Do we place a bet?
Yeah.
Right. And I think if we get that right,
yes,
you have a rich source of data, you have evidence-based policy making across multiple agencies with inside government, which is something to date we haven't had.
Yes.
We have pockets of excellence. Can we put the pocket of excellence together? And therefore that allows a much stronger national conversation. And hopefully allows us to not make mistakes or if you make a mistake, you go, we put a bet here, it didn't work. You know why it didn't work? Because this changed and that changed, and we learn.
Exactly.
And I think the whole notion about, I think the core concept around future skilling actually is that we're all going to have to continuously learn. And it goes back to this concept of lifelong learning, which is a key pillar in the government strategy and a key pillar that Solus drives. And we know that we have more than 5,000 learners over the next 5 years to hit certain targets.
Yeah.
And I actually sometimes think that's the wrong way to think about it.
Yes.
I think the real thing is that we have to try and imbue this concept of learning in people all the time in the modern world and adapt your skill set.
Yeah.
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 You know, things change. We
Things
adapt.
do
I mean,
change,
25 years ago, Facebook was not a thing.
It's hard to believe,
yeah,
really,
Facebook is a job.
when you think about it.
Yeah, Facebook is a job. It's like in terms of marketing and link, they weren't existing 25 years ago. 25 years ago, the internet wasn't a thing. Like now we don't even worry about it.
I know.
So if you think of it like that, and people adapt, and courses adapt, and skills adapt.
Yes.
And we do know the one thing we can say about humans is that we are adaptable.
We know that for sure.
Yeah. So, and I do think that, but I think this technology around AI is going to fundamentally change that. And that's where we have to be thoughtful, but also create the awareness without, scaring people.
Yeah.
But go upskill yourself, or at least engage with the basics so you know what the conversation is.
Yeah.
And then decide where to go.
Yeah.
But be under no illusion that the world is changing from a workforce development perspective.
Yeah.
It
does feel in Ireland we are at a moment actually in terms of skills, and it feels like a lot of things are all coming together. It feels a little bit like that. Yes, you do have the kind of external forces that are maybe pushing us a little bit that way, but I do think, and I'll maybe just bring you back just to the idea of the National Skills Observatory that you mentioned there, Kevin. I mean, obviously it's something I'm hugely behind as well in terms of my role in Solus, and we have felt that this was something that was needed, and we've been pushing for this over the last couple of years, and with your help and support, and I think a lot of the insights from the National Skills Council that we've seen in the last few months and with government, that whole focus and that vehicle idea of having a National Skills Observatory, it does seem to be coming together, in a way that just feels right, or it just feels natural. So like in Solus, we have had, in November last year, we launched the 20th ever National Skills Bulletin. And unbelievably, some people were coming up to me at the event. We had a wonderful event in the RDS actually, and you were there with us. But some people were saying to me, there's good information in that National Skills Bulletin. And I was thinking, well, we have had it for 20 years. But, it has played a massive part actually in helping us shape the future and thinking about where we need skills, where skill shortages are, how we measure, how we think about what evidence we want to collect in terms of how we develop and shape our own education systems, and how we embrace that concept of lifelong learning. But it feels like we've 20 years of experience. As you say, we've lots of different partners out there, and that feeling of community and connection and building a bigger ecosphere, essentially, in terms of our national skills. It does feel like it is a time where it is right to come together and for us to have a smarter, better, more focused solution in terms of what we want to do for the future.
Yeah. I think timing is everything. And I think the stars aligned on this one. I think the OECD's report highlighted it, right? The department put a lot of money and effort with the OECD and with our partners across the ecosystem to put together a blueprint for the future.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
That's how I see it. That was one of the key call outs.
Yes.
Right? And it's actionable.
It is.
Like it is doable, right?
Yes.
And I think the fact that at the council level, we were able to go, actually, this is a really good idea. And you set up a working group and you put the players around the room. We did that meeting in IBEC, put the players around the room and go, lads, figure this out.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
You know, egos aside, departmental stuff aside, what's the right thing for the country?
Exactly.
Right. And I think I've tried to manage and work with the council and the department on that level.
Yes.
Right. And go, nothing to do with individual organizations or individual companies. This is a national issue. This is building for the future.
Yeah.
And I think I think we put that lens on it. We had a very good working group. It was chaired by Tony O'Donoghue, who's a very seasoned operator at this level.
Yeah.
And
a real expert.
A real expert, right? And across the system.
Yeah.
And I think they put together a really, really good paper that the department liked, worked with them.
Yes, absolutely.
Right. And I think that's the whole thing. You know, you could take a view of the Skills Council and say, right, our job is to be independent and beat the government up. That's not going to work. No one wants to do that.
No.
The job is together, collectively, how do we do this? We're independent, but we you know, we've got to rely on the expertise of state agencies and and go, no, we've tried this, but here's how we might do it. And I think that's been the value of the work. And I think the observatory is tangible.
Yes, absolutely.
And people can see the vision and people want the vision and they go, this would be great if we had this. And we have the expertise.
Yes.
And I think in terms of the SMLRU, it's like a 20 years overnight success.
That's actually
like you're grinding away and suddenly go, what? We have it? I mean, it's a bit like that.
It is.
And suddenly it comes to the fore and it's there and then we add to it.
Yes.
You know, and I think so I think it's just timing. And I think but if we're to build the next skills ecosystem for the next 10 to 15 years, we need to be able to make these decisions because budgets will be tighter. Skills profiles are changing.
Yes.
There are models out there. Australia are doing some stuff. You've seen, other countries.
Absolutely.
The UK have done some interesting work in Warwick. You know, so it's there.
It is. Yeah.
And I think that's the value.
And I think, the vision that we now collectively have for the Skills Observatory, it is about trying to capture and really get into what the big societal challenges are, as well as the opportunities. So we have this central repository almost, and it's and I think you're right in what you say, in that it is a collective ambition. And it isn't about people, trying to do one thing over another. We're trying to do the same thing collectively because we want to deliver on those big challenges. And we know what they are. I mean, AI presents huge opportunities for us, of course, but also there are challenges with that. We know with our own economy here, yes, we have full employment at the moment, but, we're always kind of aware of what might happen. We're not very long out of a global pandemic, and sometimes we forget that, but, it is only a few years back, really. We have had a recession in the country. We're still facing unemployment, albeit it is, it's at its lowest level for a very long time, but we're looking at that. We know there's a lot of people who have a disability in Ireland. We know that there are issues to be done in construction, in housing. So having a central agreed approach to what we want to do with our skills, building on the expertise that you have from Microsoft and the different roles that you've had over the years, it does feel like it is quite exciting. And what we seen actually when we were developing this proposal and everyone was behind it was actually Europe came out with their Pact for Skills, and they also talked about having a skills observatory.
Yeah.
So I think that was quite reassuring actually in a way that it felt that we were going in the right direction. So, I mean, I think it's really exciting, and I think we're all looking forward to what it looks like. But I'm maybe just going to bring you back just slightly, because I mean, I think people listening to this, Kevin, be very interested in the journey that you've been on, and, you know, the roles that you have and what you've been able to do. And I was going to ask you, do you think from your own perspective, is there a couple of skills, you know, or a certain skill set that you have felt has been really important for you in getting you to this, you know, this hugely influential position that you're in, where you're making such great changes and setting such vision for the country here?
That's a really interesting question. I think I have worked with really amazing people.
Okay.
Right. And have been given the ability to create teams, right, and then let them off. So the current Dream Space team, 5 or 6 gifted teachers. Now it's its own thing. It just goes. I just nudge. They're so talented. I think one of the things, and it's a difficult thing to do, is to step back from the limelight. Because we all want to, hey, I'm brilliant. hey, it's all me. You know, and so as I've got a little older, I wouldn't say I've matured, but as I got a little older, you can go, you know what? You don't have to be front and center of this. You empower them, right? And I think in Microsoft, I've been allowed to do that in education. So I've been in education for almost 22 years, and, you know, at the vanguard of our educational programs has allowed me to learn lots, both from colleagues in Ireland, but I think in Europe and globally. Okay. You know, as we let you, and you change and you adapt. But I think, you know, I was allowed to do this stuff, and I think that's been hugely impactful. I think one of the core skills, I don't know whether it's a skill or it's a trait, it's curiosity.
Okay.
Right.
And you're not the first person that mentioned that, actually.
Yeah. I mean, I love to learn. I'm still doing microcreds at my age. Right.
I'm with you. I'm one of those lifelong learners as well.
So I'm just toying with which diploma in corporate governance I do in this September, right? So I think huge curiosity, huge appetite for learning and learning new things. I think that keeps you, it keeps you on the pulse. Yes. Right? And I think, the Microsoft, we use the term growth mindset as part of it. I think curiosity is, it's like, you know, I think that's been, I think, a skill or a trait that has helped me immensely. And I do think, I suppose there's a responsibility on all of us to try and create a better society, or, you know, if you're in a position of power or influence, that you give back time to create opportunities for others, right? And I think there is this notion, John Rawls, the American philosopher, this notion of architecting opportunity. Okay. Right. His theory was all about theory of justice and stuff, but there was this notion of architecting opportunity for others. And I think, I suppose I have a sense of that. I've always had a sense of that. I think when you have a child with disability, that sometimes become more acute. You go, and you see the challenges they have and their families have, you know, and we've had, and ours I wouldn't say it's particularly acute, but you're in that space. Yeah. I think that sort of drives you as well. And I think, you know, influence and being in the conversation steers it that way. So I think they're the kind of drivers that have brought me to where I am. And I like the work. Yes. Like I'm interested. I mean, like I started off as a statistician in Boston Public Schools 30 odd years ago. Okay, you know, when we were looking at Clinton had come to power in 1992. There was a school to work
Mm-hmm.
legislation. Boston was one of the first states to get the money. We built this kind of pathway approach to learning, and Boston was working in areas which quite strong social deprecation and things like that.
Okay.
So we were building these pathways. Now there was no tech in those days, really. There were health pathways.
Okay.
They were automated. So you build up that. But the key thing, and going back to the National Observatory, I mean, we had data.
Yes.
Right. We had massive data.
Yes.
And the reason we had all this data was because of the segregation issues in the 70s with Boston schools.
Okay. Yeah.
Because you had to put the appropriate students in the appropriate schools, and give equal opportunity.
Yeah.
So they had to build these. We had these databases, so we had all this data.
Yeah.
So there was a really strong data culture of using data to
real evidence
to inform policy.
Yes.
Right. So I was, when I came back here in 2000, that wasn't the case here. So
no.
Right, if you think about it.
No. 25 years ago.
25 years ago. So all these kind of experiences and skills and opportunities led to this, to where you are right now.
Yes. Yes. That's quite a journey.
It's quite a journey. And, a lot of people looked after me on the way. So it's part of your own drive and ambition, but it's also luck.
Yeah.
And it's a bit of luck as well.
Yeah.
And it's timing, as I said earlier on.
Yes.
Right place, right time, right idea.
Yes.
Or you might be an overnight success and may make 20 years to get to a point. But perseverance is something else. If you believe you're doing the right thing, and you get that opportunity, stay the course.
Yeah. And it's very clear that you have that strong belief in societal purpose and doing something that, your work actually is contributing to an improved society. I mean, that comes out very clearly. And I think that's hugely important. I mean, I've been lucky enough to be in dream space.
Yeah.
So I've been in dream space and I've seen it and I've felt it. And, lots of people listening to this will have had their children in it, or, they'll have been in it for one reason or another. And it's hugely inspiring, actually, to see the role that Microsoft has actually played and the role that you have brought to that in terms of that societal piece. I know we could probably sit here and talk all day, Kevin, because we have so many of these future skills areas and issues, that entertain us, and keep us challenged and keep us questioning. But I'm maybe just going to ask you, maybe just going to come to the end now, and I'm going to sort of finish on a couple of questions. But the first one is, we've talked about the future and we've talked about the future skills space, and you've mentioned lots of different things there. You mentioned AI. We had the OECD review, which was, the OECD coming into Ireland and saying, well, you're doing some things really well, learn skills, but there are lots of other things you could do. And that's given us a blueprint for the future in many ways. But you also talked about that transversal side of skills as well, to a degree that you see as hugely important. So in that context, is there maybe one or two particular future skills areas that you think the country really needs to focus on in the coming years?
Again, that's a really good question. I think one way to look at it is the World Economic Forum report, published recently, I think it was in February, has a quadrant.
Yes.
Right. On the right-hand side of the quadrant, it has future skills, as one would expect.
Yes.
Data science, AI, whatever. And then it has this notion of communication skills, transversal skills.
Yes.
Ability to communicate as equally important in that space, right?
Yes.
So I think that's something we should have a look at and go, okay, what does that mean for us? I think it's always going to be a blend, right? And as the tech becomes more pervasive, and how artificial intelligence, for want of a better word, lands over the next 5 to 10 years, the ability to communicate, be curious, to lead, to be supportive, to be empathetic, are going to remain as core as anything else, right?
Yes.
My concern is that, again, in the last couple of months, there have been some really good reports published. One to do with numeracy and literacy levels among adults.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
That needs to improve.
Yes.
Right.
Because we haven't really done any better in Ireland.
No.
That's kind of what the reports is telling us, really, since 2012 odd.
Yeah,
yes.
exactly. Right. That's a real problem, because the core
something's
fabric,
wrong.
something's wrong. So the core fabric the underpinning society needs to be addressed. Right. And I think the second point to that is the lifelong learning report that was published, which is hugely positive.
Yes.
However, go into it and you go, there's some underlying issues that we need to address.
Absolutely,
right. Now, I think we have to keep our eye on the ball, and we have to look at this in a very tiered and targeted way and go, actually, we have a problem there. What are we going to do about it? Right. And is literacy levels, numeracy levels, and digital fluency levels.
Yes.
Right. So that's so, and I know that's part of what your organization does, but you can't do it on your own.
No.
Nor should you, right?
No.
And again, the lifelong learning thing is, how do we think about that to infuse people to learn, to be curious, right? Again, your organization is doing lots of that, but again, it's not totally your responsibility. So, not to be negative, but there is I would just to be cautious that we need to focus on these things and we need to pay attention to those details. And we need to get these things right as well, so that we can avail of this.
Absolutely.
And
absolutely,
it's there. And again, it comes back to if we have good, solid, real-time data, you can start having those conversations.
Yeah, we know how to make decisions.
And you go, actually, this is a problem. What do we do?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And then it feeds back into the system in primary and secondary school. What are we missing?
Yes.
What needs to change?
Yes. Yes.
And I do think, that whole sector has had a huge existential challenge with AI, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. It's here.
Yeah.
I'm not tried about it. What do we do about that?
Yeah.
How do we integrate the AI into that sort of stuff? I think that's and I don't think there's any right answer right now, but there's lots of really good literature emerging.
There is.
There's lots of really good frameworks emerging.
There is.
What I would say is we need to start doing experiments. Gathering data, back to evidence. We just published a report in Northern Ireland in February where with 100 teachers, and they developed 624 odd use cases of the role of Copilot AI in their classroom.
Okay.
Very interesting stuff.
Okay.
Very positive.
Okay.
Some negative stuff.
Yeah.
Some not horrible, ugly stuff going, this won't work here.
Yeah.
But you've got a piece of evidence.
Yeah.
And you go, right, we need to do that down here. And we need to have this constant evidence gathering and rethinking, reframing.
Yeah.
And that, to me, that becomes your layer. So whatever the future skills are, you have evidence about where you're at and where the maturity curve is.
Yeah.
And I think that's where I would like the council to be moving towards in the next 18 months.
Yeah.
And I think if we're in the middle of a huge change, it's happening. What's the right answer? Nobody knows, but here are the steps.
Yes. Yes.
To make good decisions, to provide everyone with an opportunity to avail of the opportunities that will emerge.
Yeah. And you mentioned two very, very important reports there, I think, in terms of the future. That assessment that we had of Ireland were really, we're not improving or growing our literacy and our numeracy. And I think, your idea of curiosity, experiments, is there a role for AI in that, as you're seeing through Northern Ireland? And yes, the lifelong learning report as well. So again, it's a report that we publish in Solace from our Skills and Labour Market Research Unit. And it is in many ways very positive. The Skills Council strategy, the skills strategy we had for Ireland wanted us to get 15%. We're now at 16%, of people who are participating in lifelong learning. But as you say, it's getting into the detail of that. What does it actually mean for us, and what can we learn from that, and how do we drill into that? So I'm just going to wrap up now. So I'm just going to give you one last area to close out on, because the whole point of our podcast, as I said at the start, is Future Skills Ireland podcast, is to start a new conversation on skills for Ireland. You gave us lots of food for thought there, and certainly, I'm at this side of the table being very excited about the National Skills Observatory hopefully coming into existence soon. But do you have any final thoughts or reflections that you'd like to add into further to what you already said in terms of that national conversation on skills?
I think while we think for the future and the skills we've talked about, there is a parallel integrated conversation around social inclusion.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And meaningful work.
Yes.
For people with disabilities.
Yes.
And I think that's equally important, because I think it's about social cohesion. Mm-hmm. It's about the fabric of a society, about community. The things that are really important to this country, the things that make this country great, right? We need to make sure that we don't lose sight of that.
Absolutely.
Right. And I think that's a challenging conversation, because it's not an easy conversation, right? It's not an easy conversation, and it's not an easy fix.
No.
Right. No. And as an employer, trying to engage in that is very challenging. We've made some strides, but it's a challenge, and that we true of other. As a parent, it's of course it's a challenge. Yet there are great organisations out there that are doing stuff. What I would like the council to do in our next iteration, once we get through this period of time, is to focus on that and think about, what does an integrated provision for social inclusion look like? I know you talked to Michael this morning. Solus are doing great work with As I Am. It's putting that all together in that one conversation, again, mapping it and then thinking about the data and go, okay, we need to do this, we need to do that. I think there's a parallel thing here, because it's easy to lose sight of that.
Absolutely.
And I would consider my term in the council a failure if we didn't address that in some way and have some recommendations and have some papers and have brought all those parties together and say, okay, this is great. Now, how do we put it all together?
Yes.
I think, to me, that's of equal importance. Yeah.
And I fundamentally agree with you actually on that as well. So I think that is a hugely important point in which we close off our podcast today. I'd like to thank you very, very much, Kevin, for joining me today for our Future Skills Ireland podcast. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Pleasure.